You're listening to a podcast from thespoilist.com. Cyberspace, the new frontier. These are the voyages of the podcast First Contact. Its mission? To explore every episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. To seek out new viewers and have new conversations. To boldly view what many have viewed before. Welcome to First Contact, a Next Generation intro cast. This time we are looking at Where No One Has Gone Before. First aired the week of October 26, 1987. It was directed by Rob Bowman, written by Diane Duane and Michael Reeves. Hello everyone, I'm Andrew.
I'm James.
And I'm Alex.
So, James, what happens in this episode? I don't remember.
A supposedly brilliant warp scientist, Kaczynski, and his mysterious assistant, known as the Traveller, board the Enterprise to conduct some experiments on the engines in order to improve them. Riker and others have doubts about the science, but he has proven records in improving efficiency on other ships. During the first test, something goes wrong, and the Enterprise ends up several galaxies away. Is Kaczynski a genius? How will the crew get home? Is no one concerned about the Traveller's special bonds with Wesley? Find out now in First Contact.
Thanks for that, James. Where No One Has Gone Before. So, Alex, you've never seen this show before. Overall opinions?
I think this was my favourite episode of the series so far. I really enjoyed this one. I thought it had lots of elements that were very good. A great improvement on the last 3 episodes, definitely.
James, what do you think of it? You've seen it many times before, I imagine.
This is probably about the 5th or 6th time, I think, maybe. It's okay. It's still got a lot of the first season weirdness, but overall it is, I would also say, the best episode so far.
Okay, so let's get into the meat of it. Kaczynski, it's quite interesting. We've got him coming on board. You might say some of our actual characters on the show may be a bit bland. Perhaps refreshing to see someone so arrogant and so flawed.
Yeah, I really like the character of Kaczynski. I think a lazy criticism to draw against Star Trek would be that the characters can be quite pompous. I suppose you could especially draw that of Picard. And so it's nice to go to an extreme with someone coming in with such arrogance and whatnot, and played for laughs, really. I thought that was really good.
I particularly like it how Riker brings Counselor Troi down, and when he basically acts like a complete tool, she's there to tell Riker exactly what kind of man he is.
But she says that he actually he has conviction. He actually believes what he's doing will work, and he is doing what he believes he's doing to the warp drive.
It's a little bit redundant, I would say. He very quickly establishes what his character is, and then we basically have Counselor Troi being a narrator.
Well, I mean, one of the things that could happen with this episode, if you don't have Troi there, you could think that all this time he's a fraud, and, he's just basically putting on a show to make people think he's the one doing this to the warp drive. But her being there means the audience see that Kaczynski actually believes he is this great scientist who's revolutionised warp drive.
I think it's just worth saying for a second that actually that's one of the things that I enjoyed most about his character. In the Next Generation so far, if a character acted like that, you'd sort of expect, oh, well, they're having their mind controlled by someone else, or they've been possessed, or memory wiped, or something like that. To actually have someone who's just convinced himself that he's the one doing it, and have it as a character flaw rather than the result of an outside influence, that's so much better. It's so refreshing. It makes a nice change, and it's giving us some good character-based stuff that perhaps we've been missing with the guest cast in previous episodes.
No real bad guy per se in this episode. The problem comes when a warp test goes wrong and they end up on the other side of the universe, and they're going to be spending the next 7 seasons trying to get home while spending a lot of time in the holodeck. No, sorry, wrong show. Quite an interesting problem for the crew. They find themselves on the other side of the universe. Do they explore, or do they just focus on trying to get back as quickly as possible?
Yes, a quick time for reassertion of our characters' sets of values. Yes, he's the one who'd like to stay and study. No, they're the one that wants to get back home.
Yeah, the character of the Traveller, brought in as the mysterious assistant. Does anyone think at the point he's introduced, he's not going to be a key plot element? A mysterious alien doesn't seem to have much to do. Yeah, he's going to have something to do with what's going on in this episode.
I think you might have been able to delay that assumption if you hadn't just... right from the moment he's introduced with, who's this? He's my assistant. Alright, okay. That wasn't weird at all. If they just left it without reference, you could have delayed that a bit longer, and it probably would have benefited from it, actually. You wouldn't have been able to delay it too long. It would have been until the conversation between him and Wesley, but probably would have benefited it slightly.
Yeah, and since you've mentioned Wesley, he has a special bond with the Traveller. He instantly gravitates towards Wesley, and it seems they share a similar kind of thinking.
Yes, and if we're talking about reassertion of character traits, reassertion of, hey Wes, he's quite smart, you know. He's quite nerdy and has all this knowledge, but he doesn't get to use it. And I mean, obviously that's setting it up for the way that the episode pans out towards the end.
Did we find it a plausible kind of plot in the world of Star Trek? We're always told that, you know, warp 10 is a unreachable limit, theoretical maximum warp 9.9 onto infinity. Here they travel 2,700,000 light years to the galaxy M33. Do you think that's something we can accept? Other aliens coming in, being a lot more powerful than us? I suppose we've seen Q already. This is a different take on a powerful alien.
Well, I kind of like to think that there's nothing that should be off limits. And I don't see any reason that this should be any less plausible than anything else. I think it's perhaps odd that there's just... we don't really ever get an explanation of it. It makes me think of the old Lee and Herring routines in Fist of Fun with the... But that's impossible. How can you possibly achieve it? Surely it can't be done. Ah. What? But no, it can't be done. Ah, but it can. Well, it's not enough to say, but it can. Ah, but it is. No, there must be more. But we just... yeah, we never get an understanding of how maybe that's to the detriment, but I guess it's just one of those things that you go, okay, he's done that, fair enough. I can't say that it played on my mind too greatly.
One attempt to get back, and they end up at the very edge of the universe, where it seems space, time and thought are all combined into one thing, and we again get the crew living out their fantasies in some ways. I suppose we're meant to learn some more about the crew when they start seeing things, seeing their desires, seeing just stuff from their past. So, do you think you learned much about the crew from what they saw?
Tasha Yar is scared of rape gangs.
Worf gets to see his old pet, his pet Targ, and then she remembers that she also had a pet, a kitty cat. And we get a flashback and you think, oh my god, it's the rape gangs. She mentioned the rape gangs before. She's being chased down a sewer, it seems, and then she says it explicitly. I was happy just to take it as read, but then she says, Georgie, it was the rape gangs.
Family show.
What does she think that they'll do to the cat?
I mean, this is clearly something that is in Tasha Yar's character Bible. This is her defining trait. There's a little bit of a lack of subtlety in her characterization.
Yes. I mean, it does seem to be that her entire backstory is defined by the rape gangs, and I suppose if that were real, maybe it would be. However, what makes it questionable is that clearly, at this point anyway, they don't really seem to have thought of any more backstory for her other than that. And if you're going to make the entire basis of your character's backstory, she used to be chased by rape gangs, it's not really enough, is my contention.
Well, she also had a kitty cat.
Yeah, for one fleeting moment you think, oh, it's nice, she's remembering her childhood, she had a cat, but no, the cat is connected to the rape gangs.
Is this the last time rape gangs are mentioned? Because I didn't even remember rape gangs until I watched it on The Naked Now. And I think that's the last time it's mentioned.
And yet, her visions and Worf's visions are surprisingly more defined than most of the other ones, aside from Picard's. The other ones are just surreal for surrealism's sake. So, trying to find things that stand out as being, hey, that's particularly odd. So, the ballet and the string quartet, there's no logic to it.
No, I mean, that string quartet scene, it seemed like to me they had cut to another episode or had changed the channel or something. Because all of a sudden, you have one scene which the crew we know involved in the story, and then all of a sudden there's just some guy playing in a string quartet, and you're sort of going, well, what's this got to do with anything? I don't really understand. I don't know who this crew member is. Why is him playing in a string quartet important? Does this have anything to do with anything? Then we get the ballet and you think, okay, you're attempting a montage, but you don't really know what you're doing.
I can let the ballet pass because that's at least conceivable. Oh, okay, she used to do ballet, but the string quartet just makes no sense. What does he, before he joined the Enterprise in his free time, he used to dress up in the full gear and play in a string quartet? Because if it doesn't relate to him personally, it doesn't fit with what's happened with everyone else. Everyone else is remembering something from their past or something that they do, or unless I've just got the wrong handle on this concept. And if that's the case, then perhaps that's shows a downside to the writing here. It's just that one particular one really stood out as being totally illogical.
I feel really sorry for that guy fantasizing about the string quartet. They have a mess hall where everybody has their meals. You know, this big room where everyone can socialize and eat. And he's alone in his room eating a meal, fantasizing about being in a string quartet.
He has terrible body odour. No one wants to eat with him. He has to go there after everyone else has gone.
There's much more to this episode than I previously thought.
And of course Picard, it seems like every bachelor, he's a total mummy's boy. Who does he picture but his mother, who he believes will be able to tell him why he's at the edge of the universe.
And in typical mother fashion, she turns to him and says, "Never mind that, dear, now. Let's just sit down and have a nice cup of Earl Grey."
Ah yes, Earl Grey, isn't that... That's very nice to hear that mentioned in this episode. That's gonna come up again.
Before going into this series, that's about one of the only things I could have told you about Picard. He likes Earl Grey. It's something I've picked up somewhere along the line. So this was very much one of those moments of watching it going, reference!
One of the things we see in this episode is yet another Chief Engineer. We see Argyle.
Chief Engineer Argyle, and he is introduced as one of our chief engineers, so they are clearly trying to establish that they have a shift, but giving them the word chief just seems to cheapen it, really, if there's lots of you.
where are they getting these staff from? And do none of them worry about coming into this job? I mean, it's kind of like taking on the gig drumming with Spinal Tap. The lifespan is fairly short.
There's 4 chief engineers in season 1.
Chief Engineer Argyle is the longest running of our chief engineers in the first season.
He's in 2 episodes. I'm mentioned in another. I'm reading here about Argyle, the person who played him, because they were considering Argyle to be the main chief engineer. The person who played him told fans to send in letters campaigning for him to be made the chief engineer, and they arrived before the episode had aired.
Will people get behind any letter writing campaign involving Star Trek? Did they say, oh, this show looks like it's going to run, it's got huge ratings, it's not going to get cancelled, but I don't really like Star Trek for its science fiction stories combining morality tales and socio-political comment. What I like is writing into a television network. That's what I liked about it. You know, it was a real sense of community when Star Trek got cancelled. We all came together to try and get it back on the air, and we've done that now, but I need another letter writing campaign.
I have to say, I thought Argyle was largely forgettable. I had to think for a minute there to try and separate him out in my mind from anyone else. Maybe I'm confusing him with the baby. Oh no, there's Argyle, and there's the baby. It was the bib and the bonnet that threw me for a minute.
Obscure Red Dwarf references on a Star Trek The Next Generation podcast.
Let's just take a minute to take that in. Anyway, chief engineers possibly don't last because it seems they're all outsmarted by teenager and wonderkind Wesley Crusher.
But no one wants to pay any attention to Wesley, and you can sort of see why.
Well, would you take anyone seriously wearing that sweater?
No, I would not.
I mean, you would say they've got certain things right. The uniforms I don't have any problem with, but people's casual clothes, I don't even know what they're aiming for. It's not quite 80s, it's not futuristic. I don't know. It's just like they've all got lost in a really bad wool shop.
It's kind of like Doctor Who was during that period, that whenever they tried to design the future, they couldn't ever quite escape the grip of the 80s. There's always that slight carryover, which creates some very odd combinations. And I suppose that's the same with any decade, really, and when you look back at it, it wouldn't perhaps have seemed odd at the time, but later on it certainly does.
Now, when he's trying to say something to the commander, never mind we're kind of in a red alert situation, he can stay doing a school project in the corner of main engineering, that's okay, but when he tries to talk to Riker, not now Wesley, it's not quite shut up Wesley, but it's nice to see him being dismissed, despite him clearly knowing everything about everything.
I mean, a couple of things. On one hand, the minute that the Traveller starts phasing, surely you'd start calling for some attention rather than just sit in the corner and they go, "Oh, isn't that weird? I might tell someone about that in a few hours' time. I imagine it might be quite important to the plot." And also, if later on when Riker's saying, "Not now, Wesley," surely you'd be more forceful in your point. It's nitpicking, but it was something that I thought at the time. Would he just give up then? Really? Does that play into the character as we've established him so far?
If only he was drunk, he would be able to get his point across a lot better.
Wesley does respect authority, so I can kind of understand him. You know, even when he knows it, he knows what's happening. When Riker tells him to shut up, he does.
With Wesley in this episode, it feels like we're trying very hard to re-establish his part on the ship because of the developments at the end of the episode. And I would say that those developments at the end are welcome because you can do away with the tiresome business of, well, Wesley, what are you doing on the bridge? Get away from the bridge. Then again, you're a young boy, and I see myself in you. Come to the bridge. Take a seat. Not there, you fool! Get off the bridge! We can do away with that at last. But it does mean that we have to go back through all of this thing of no one listens to him and whatnot.
What do we think of Wesley's relationship with the Traveller? It is clearly trying to make sure we're on board with what Wesley is, the potential of Wesley. Is it just a little bit too easy that the bond instantly formed, Wesley sitting beside him and main engineering? I don't feel they really particularly earn their relationship, especially. It just seems a little bit too convenient.
No, I suppose they try to make up for it later on by having the Traveller saying, "Oh, he's a very special boy," as if that isn't creepy. But yeah, because it comes so late on, it does play oddly at the start, and perhaps we could have done with something early on to understand why he's taking such an interest in such a young boy.
I think maybe because I've seen this episode quite a few times, it doesn't seem out of place to me now.
Let's just cover the developments in Wesley's character. He is now established by some alien we know nothing about. He is a prodigy. He is the Mozart of space and time and physics and needs encouragement. So that means he's going to be brought into the plots. Maybe a little bit irritating that we're getting told this, but he has proved himself in the previous episodes, and it does really, as you've said, it does remove the need to shoehorn him into any of the plots. He's going to be there. He gets a commission, which I don't know how that's going to upset some of the other officers on the ship, but at the end of the episode, he becomes essentially part of the crew.
And I can live with that. As I say, it sort of does away with all of that Faye business with him not being able to get on the bridge and whatnot, and that would become deeply wearing if you had it in more and more episodes. I'm all for giving him a promotion and giving him an actual reason to be there.
But isn't the crew members on board who don't actually hold the rank of ensign? Is it crewmen who don't actually hold the rank of even ensign? So Wesley now ranks above other people.
Well, this is fudged somewhat in Star Trek. Even in the new Star Trek movie, how he enlists in Starfleet. Now, Starfleet Academy, as will be established later on, is extraordinarily hard to get into. It's the best of the best. But you can also enlist in Starfleet. You can be a non-com. You don't actually have to be an officer. I mean, Captain, Commander, Lieutenant, and Ensign. These are the officers. These are the elite. Most people in the Enterprise, you wouldn't think would actually have any rank at all. It's the flagship, but it's going to be a lot of people's jobs to, mop up the holodeck after Riker's been in there. I guess Picard feels some sort of obligation towards Wesley, and the character has to develop to become part of the show. He did need a push forward in order to keep him as a series regular. Whether other showrunners would have seen this as a necessity, or would have said there's nowhere to go with this character, it seems all the action's going to take place on the bridge. You're not going to involve the families very often, so you really need to get this character in there.
Yes. As I say, it in theory, it should allow you to get on with things much quicker. And you can have him where you want him because you've set up that nice scenario of he's allowed on the bridge, but he's got to be doing a lot of studying, so you can have the best of both worlds, really. I would just say, though, that for all the good thing about trying to develop Wesley's character, and I think that is a good idea, the rest of the show can suffer in places from spending time on these sort of issues. For example, the whole scenario with we have to get out of here, we don't know what could happen. The problem is because it's quite an intangible threat, we keep being told we need to deal with this very quickly. but we never really get a sense of why. We talked in the last episode about how there was a much greater sense of urgency than there had been in previous episodes because the crew of the Enterprise were under threat because there was no power and people would freeze to death. In this episode, I felt that although the threat should have been the same, it didn't come across that way. There didn't feel like there was a sense of urgency of, we need to get out of here quick. You never got the sense that, well, yes, the Traveller needs to get on with it. You got the sort of sense quite often of, yeah, let the sod rest. Yeah, let him have a bit of sleep. God's sake.
There wasn't any sense that they weren't going to get back home at the end of the episode. I don't think you ever felt there was any danger in terms of the ship not getting back, which is in many ways something that goes along with a long-running show, that basically you know the status quo will be re-established, and other than them being far away, there was no immediate peril other than that from the enemy within, the thoughts that do weird things with fires and quartets.
Those dangerous quartets.
The ending is something I want to talk about. Now, Doctor Who has often been criticised for using I believe in fairies kind of logic. It's, you know, the power of thinking overcomes the bad. And here I would say the ending is very much quite like that. Everybody focus your thoughts on the Traveller, and if we all come together then we can definitely get away, which is something quite unusual in Star Trek, which is usually quite techie.
Yes, I always have a bit of a problem with that trend in fiction of positive thinking will get us through this. It always feels like a slight cop-out. Did it bother me here? A little bit, I suppose. You know, you got there and you thought, oh, is that the way they're going to do it? But I wouldn't say that it played on my mind, as in, is that the way they're going to do it? Oh, well, that ruins it for me. It was just, oh, that's how they're going to do it. Well, that's disappointing, but we'll move on. I thought there was enough stuff in the episode that was good to balance that out, so that it's not my overriding memory.
I mean, I don't like those type of endings, you know, where it's positive thinking, because it always just... I mean, I might offend somebody saying this, but it always makes me think of when people pray after things happen, as if it's going to make this great difference. And it always just reminds me of that.
80s alert, we see a man in a dress, and he steps up to think particularly positively and help the Traveller there. Did that stand out this time, or are you're now down with the men in the dresses?
I didn't even notice the man in a dress. I missed it.
I did notice, but it felt less jarring this time. I can't place my finger on why, but there was something about the way it was filmed in the first episode that made it stand out a lot more than it did here.
I found it a perfectly enjoyable episode, the best so far. I'm sure there'll be better to come, there is room for improvement, but satisfying enough.
Yes, I would go along with that. As we said, it's the best one there's been so far. Is it a perfect episode? No, not quite. There are some elements that it would be better for the adjustment of. The science, yes. I think the main fault is just that lack of peril. But I can forgive it for other things. I would certainly not turn to anyone and say, yeah, just avoid that episode in the way that I would say with Code of Honor.
The one really brilliant thing about this episode was Argyle. I really hope that Paramount make him permanent chief engineer. I'm going to send a letter in to them to make sure they do that.
I would like to see an Argyle spin-off movie.
He should have his own spin-off series.
And if you'd like to see an Argyle spin-off series, then write to us at The Spoilist.
Yes. First contact at thespoilist.com, Twitter at thespoilist, or facebook.com/thespoilist. You can find us there and share with us your inane comments about minor Star Trek characters and out-of-work actors. thank you once again for listening. We hope we took you where you've never been before. We'll be back very soon with another episode of Star Trek The Next Generation to dissect and perhaps make better with our unique commentary. But for now, from me, goodbye.
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 I can't believe we actually got something intellectual out of this.
We need to balance it out with knob jokes.